and welcome to this broadcast by Brexit Watch. I'm your host, Jonathan Saxby. Today we are delighted to welcome back the former Brexit Party MEP and former Tory Minister, Anne Widdecombe. Anne Widdecombe, welcome back to Brexit Watch.
Thank you, good to be here.
And today I'd like to focus on the situation with Brexit. We're particularly keen to talk about the withdrawal agreement, your thoughts on the Northern Ireland Protocol, where things stand with the negotiations. Before we get into that, since we last spoke, obviously things have moved on a little bit in terms of the current coronavirus crisis. We've had obviously some easing of the lockdown. We've also had some localized lockdowns, Leicester, now we're hearing about Aberdeen and Manchester, all sorts of rumours swirling around about what actions the government may take next. And obviously the situation globally doesn't look particularly good. Have your thoughts changed at all since we last spoke about how the government has handled the crisis?
No, they haven't changed at all. In fact, I think the contradictions and the chaos have grown rather than diminished. You only have to look at the figures at the moment. Yes, there is a rise in infections, but there's also a huge rise, of course, in testing. So you would expect to find more infections, something very wrong if you're testing more, but you're not finding anything. But that aside, what I look at is admissions to hospital, people critically ill, people actually dying, all the things which determined the government's original approach, all the things which they stood there solemnly intoning before the flag day after day. Suddenly we're not hearing about them, and it's just about the R rate. That is the first thing. Secondly, there are just so many contradictions, as there have been throughout, in the government's approach. For example, they've now said that if you were shielding, you could indeed now come out of shielding. But oh, by the way, this is the very moment when the R rate is going up and we're going to impose lockdowns and everybody's got to wear masks. And so you've got a complete contradiction there. And it seems to me, and I've said this before, this government is suffering from a malaise which affects all governments. It's the requirement to be seen to be doing something. There is no such thing as stepping back and saying, right, we've decided this, we think that's effective, we're now going to watch how things turn out. It is an immediate reaction to the smallest change. It is riding every wave. It is a sort of catastrophe approach. And I think it hasn't served us well. If you look at countries like Sweden, which took a very, very different attitude, and you can never do a direct comparison because populations are different, distribution of populations are different. You've got to take all that into account. But nevertheless, governments which have been slightly more relaxed in their approach or more consistent and haven't just changed every time something else has changed, their economies appear to be much less badly affected than ours. So I haven't changed my mind. It is still overwhelmingly the case that something like 9 out of 10, those aren't my figures, they're the scientific figures, of those who have died have actually had other underlying health problems. Science still says that 4 out of 5 people who get it don't even notice that they've got it, or they get it so mildly that it doesn't much matter. All that to me argued and still argues against a universal lockdown. We should have locked down earlier the unhealthy, because it was obvious from day one that it was hitting those with breathing problems. We should have locked down much earlier the unhealthy. We should have recognised the problem of obesity much earlier. And I'm not being clever in retrospect, I actually wrote it in the Express at the time. Very good column, by the way, every Wednesday in the Express. We should have locked those down, told everybody else that it was their duty to get on with running the economy or with the volunteer effort. I wasn't allowed to volunteer because I was over 70. Well, what a nonsense.
And you spoke about the economy. Before we go on to Brexit, obviously we have the furlough scheme, the beginnings of the unwinding starting this month. By the end of October, the whole scheme will be unwound. What do you think we're going to be looking at come October, November in terms of the economy?
A very severely crashed economy. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the furlough scheme was necessary at the time. I think it's gone on far too long, but it was necessary at the time. I don't dispute that. But on the other hand, government has been throwing money at this as if there's no reckoning tomorrow, which there will be. For example, I took my family yesterday into a cafe, all innocent, completely forgetting that the government was going to pay 50% of our meals. There was no method at the computer of saying, well, just charge me the normal amount. That is beyond, apparently, the ability of mankind at the moment. So I have actually had a government subsidy to buy lunch. I do not need the government subsidy to buy lunch, but some other poor person, really in agonies of financial worry about this crisis, that person needs the money, and as ever, it's not being properly directed. Oh, I can get very angry about it. It's like the winter fuel allowance, you know. On 1 year, I remember vividly, in the same post came my winter fuel allowance from the government and my cheque for Strictly Come Dancing. Madness. And this just indiscriminate subsidy for eating out is madness. There'll be a huge amount of dead weight. People who will have eaten out anyway are getting the subsidy. Like I went in there yesterday because I was in a garden centre, so I said, let's go to the cafe for lunch. I was in the garden centre. I would have been there anyway. I didn't need a bribe from the government to be there.
And forceful opinions there, it's what we come to expect. Obviously, leaving the current situation, the current coronavirus crisis aside, we have another issue on the horizon, which of course is Brexit. It looks as if a no trade deal Brexit could still be in the offing, looks very likely come the end of the year. But I'd like to focus on the withdrawal agreement itself. Now, what is your understanding of the withdrawal agreement as it stands? Put simply, does it guarantee a real Brexit?
Right. Let me say two things about that, because the first was in your introduction when you said it's looking likely that there won't be a trade deal by the end of the year. If that is the case, it is time that government actually got a grip of the situation now. I mean, Boris said with wisdom at the beginning of the year, well, if we haven't got a recognised shape of a trade deal by June, we're going to have to withdraw. Now he's saying, with the usual lack of resolution that has been exhibited by this government, now he's saying, oh, well, actually, we'll wait till October. Yeah, we are getting to a point when British business needs an answer. You plan for WTO terms. You don't just plan for it in theory now. The government is saying, we can't get a deal. You plan for WTO terms. It won't do that. Everybody is in limbo waiting for the government to recognise the inevitable, which is that the EU is not going to give us the sort of trade deal that we want. Meanwhile, of course, there's all the intricacies of the withdrawal agreement, and I'm particularly exercised by the situation in Northern Ireland. Now, we had a manufactured problem with regard to the border between the north and the south. There is a recognised legal border between the north and the south. We weren't introducing something, pulling something out of a hat and saying, here's border. There's already a border there. The fear was that we would police it in terms of a hard border. And that, of course, has memories of the Troubles. So that was played on hugely by the Remain faction. Oh, you can't have a border. Even a very soft border, even with technology checking on lorries several miles away, even with the softest of soft borders, there was a huge build-up of drama because Remain saw that as a major weakness. Now, thank heavens it's not Theresa May's deal whereby Northern Ireland was just going to stay in the customs union. But it's still very bad because in order to avoid a hard border between the south and the north, they've introduced what effectively, they don't call it that, but effectively is a border down the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. And according to this protocol, Northern Ireland is going to have to obey EU rules on things like VAT. The rest of us don't. Now, I never saw a clearer recipe for the breakup of the UK than that. If, as I suspect, we do extremely well following Brexit, and the economy booms and everything turns out right, it's not going to happen by Monday afternoon, but in time, if that happens, Northern Ireland will want to be a part of that, not a part of the EU. And so I feel very strongly that this is a bad deal for Northern Ireland, and it was unnecessary. We should have stood up to them. We should have said no hard border, but yes, of course there'll be a soft border. Of course we will refine technology. We'll do it in all manner of different ways. That should have been the stand that we took, but to have said right from the start, Northern Ireland is part of the UK, there will be no difference between the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland. Boris didn't do that. Now, I don't deny for one moment that the situation that he's got is a vast improvement on the May sellout. But nevertheless, I think one has to say he sold out Northern Ireland.
My next question is really split into two. And again, I'll put it very simply. Part A, should the withdrawal agreement be repudiated? Part B, if it isn't repudiated, will the Prime Minister be able to commit to all the Brexit promises he has made?
I think the simple answer to your second question is no. The two are incompatible. On the other hand, you know, and I know, because I gather you've got some legal training, so you know as much as I do that there are always interpretations, that you can always argue about the interpretation. What I fear is that that's exactly the situation we'll be in. There'll be an awful lot of wrangling about interpretations if you go on for years and years. Whereas what we should have is just a completely clean break. In exactly the same way that if we were setting up a trade deal with Canada, we wouldn't first of all set out a political situation. We would say, right, it's trade we want. So should it be, should we withdraw from the withdrawal agreement, put it that way? Yes, but at this stage, that is going to produce an awful lot of complications. So it's one of those situations where I say, in principle, I want to do X. In practice, there may be perfectly good arguments against it. And what I really want at this point, more than anything else, is to complete the Brexit process, get out of the transition arrangements, owe the EU no more annual payments, take control of our own affairs. That last one, take control of our own affairs, might be something that we have to build on. We can take X control on January the 1st. We might have to build on by gradually diluting, watering down some of the commitments that we appear to have entered into.
And do you feel that the DUP have also been betrayed in what is happening now? Yes,
completely. Northern Ireland's been betrayed. I mean, that is the situation we're in. But Boris has an enormous majority. He was elected to get Brexit done. He was not, sadly, elected to get Brexit done on any specific set of terms. So really, it's been up to him. And he has, as I say, in order to solve one border problem, he's created another.
If in autumn, winter, we could be facing a sort of autumn, winter of discontent. Do you think the Conservative government would be willing to risk the, if you could put it like this, the bad public relations of a no trade deal Brexit, even though you and I may not see that as a problem, but the bad public relations of a no trade deal Brexit on top of that coronavirus lockdown induced economic crash? Or do you think there may be some sort of 11th hour fudge on the transition?
I don't think the British public would accept a further delay. So I don't think, for example, that he could say in December, well, we're going on till March. I just don't think they would accept that. I think the government would accept, because there is now a general acceptance in the population as a whole, that a no trade deal Brexit might happen. And it wouldn't come as any particularly nasty shock to anybody to find that it was about to happen. Remember, when we first embarked on these arguments, it was a new argument. Now it's very much seeped into people's consciousness that this really might be the way that we leave. It's no longer something bold and dramatic. It's just the inevitable end of where we are. So I think, yes, they could risk that. And I think, yes, Boris might well be willing to. But something we haven't touched on. When we talk about a crashed economy, one of the things that we have to look at is not just the balance sheet, which we know is going to be appalling. I mean, that's a given. But it's whether or not among the consequences of lockdown is a long-term, not a short-term, but a long-term change in the way that Britain works. Now, we all know people aren't going back to work. And that isn't just because we've got the entire nation cowering at home, terrified of the coronavirus. It's not because of that at all. It's because people have actually found that there are huge pluses to working from home. They don't have the expense of commuting, for example. Some of them are able to set their own hours. For mothers with small children, it can be ideal because it means you don't have to pay for expensive and impersonal childcare. And you don't have the hassle of the daily travel to work, the extra 2 hours on the day, which is, you know, useless time because all you're doing is getting from A to B. All that has changed. And of course, that's always been so in many pockets, but now it's changed on a grand scale. And in turn, employers have got to say, well, do they really want to invest the money to make the premises COVID safe? I mean, hugely expensive business. Do they really want to do that? Do they really want to go on maintaining premises when their staff can work from home? If that happens, you consider the ongoing effect, the domino effect actually, on our public transport systems, which depend on people going to work, on coffee shops and small outlets like that, which depend on passing trade and people's lunch breaks and such things. It will have a huge impact on the high street, an enormous impact on the high street. And I don't think we're really facing up to that may be a big change. One of the essays you're always required to write when you're a student is the return to normalcy ever possible? And you think of things like, well, after the First World War, you couldn't tell women they couldn't go to work any longer. They'd been working for 4 years in the munitions factories. They'd been earning their own money. Couldn't suddenly tell them that only the man can earn. It was a sea change. And we get sea changes from time to time. I think we could be in one now, a very, very big one, as to the way we work. I think the government has belatedly understood that, is urging everybody to go to work, subsidising the lunch breaks and goodness knows what else. But in the end, if people say, well, actually, you know, I'm more comfortable working from home, I want to work from home, then there's a bigger change coming, I think, than anybody has actually really looked at. We're all worried about the balance sheets, and I understand that, of course I do. That isn't the only result of this crisis.
Interesting, Anne. I've actually written about that myself in the Telegraph, and the domino effects you're speaking about, particularly with regards to the exposure many people in professional financial services actually have on these hard.
You've gone, Jonathan. Could you say that again? You went halfway through.
Sorry, let me repeat that.
Yes.
I actually wrote an article covered this very topic in the Telegraph, and I was speaking about the domino effect of this. What you're talking about, people no longer commuting into major cities, the fact there's an exposure of the financial sector to hard-hit sectors like leisure, hospitality, tourism. I was in central London yesterday. The tourists notably absent. It's an incredibly different August environment in central London at the moment. And final question, going back directly to the EU, we obviously spoke about an 11th hour fudge. Many people I've spoken to have suggested that this is the way the EU carry on. In the end, there'll be a deal, there'll be a compromise deal right at the last minute. Do you see that as likely, possible, or not?
I certainly think it's in line with their modus operandi so far. But that brings me back to what I said earlier, which is if the government thinks that's what's going to happen, that we're all going to go on talking, and suddenly find a fudge, for heaven's sake, draw the line now, and that will force the EU to come up with its proposals much earlier and in time for the transition. The end of the transition, yeah.
Sorry, I think that's a good note on which to end. So, Anne Widdecombe, thank you for coming back to Brexit Watch. We really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Brexit Watch. Bye.
And thank you for watching. You can find out more at www.brexit-watch.org. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter. And as always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time.